I stood by the window of our home in Richmond, watching the drizzle roll down the glass, the soft hum of London traffic murmuring in the distance. My heart beat with anticipation as I carefully packed the last item into the small leather suitcase. A bottle of Richard's favorite cologne. Something familiar. Something comforting. Something to remind him I was near. After 6 years of marriage, I knew things were not as effortless as they once had been. Richard came home later. He smiled less. We had dinners in silence, our little Olivia often the only bright note at the table. But I believed we could fix it. I just needed to remind him of us. That was why I had planned this trip in secret. Richard had left 2 days ago for a work conference in Bath. It was the perfect chance to surprise him, to show him I still cared, to spark something in him that I hoped had not died. Anna, my best friend since university, offered to watch Olivia. She knew I had been struggling. I had told her half-truths about needing a break, some time alone with Richard. But not even she knew what I was really planning. "You are glowing, Emily," Anna said as I dropped Olivia off at her flat in Clapham. "Go make some magic happen." I laughed, a little nervous but mostly hopeful. I took the train to Bath that afternoon, imagining his expression when he saw me at his hotel room door. I had even bought a new dress, deep emerald green, the color he once said reminded him of the sea in Italy, from our honeymoon. The train glided through the countryside. I gazed out the window, the soft hills and stone cottages rushing past. My phone buzzed. A message from Richard. "All good. Busy with meetings. Hope Olivia's well." Brief. Cold. But that was all right. I would be there soon to warm him up. By the time I arrived in Bath, the sky had turned a dusky blue. The air smelled of damp stone and early spring blossoms. I checked into the same hotel where Richard was staying, the Crescent Hill Hotel. I had called earlier and booked the room next to his, all under a false name. I wanted it to be a surprise. With my suitcase in tow and my heart pounding, I made my way up to the 4th floor. His room number was 408. I stood outside the door for a moment, smiling to myself, fixing my hair, smoothing the dress. I knocked lightly, then pressed my ear to the door. No sound. Maybe he was still at dinner. That gave me time to freshen up. I slipped into my room next door, touched up my lipstick, and prepared a little gift, just a small silver box with cufflinks engraved with his initials. A token. A whisper of love. About an hour later, I heard footsteps in the hallway. I peeked out and saw Richard walking towards his room, alone. I waited for the door to close before stepping out. I knocked. He opened the door, and his expression froze. "Emily. What on earth?" I laughed. Surprise. I wanted to be spontaneous. "Do not worry, Olivia's with Anna." He stepped aside, slowly. "You should have told me you were coming." But it was not joy in his voice. It was confusion, and something else. I stepped inside, smiling. But then my eyes fell on something that did not belong. A bouquet of red roses on the table. Wrapped in white silk paper. A handwritten note attached. My heart skipped. I had not sent them. My fingers trembled as I stepped closer to the roses. The scent of them, fresh, rich, and familiar, filled the room. I reached out and touched the edge of the paper, my heart thudding like a war drum in my chest. Richard stood behind me, saying nothing. I opened the folded note with care, as if the truth might explode in my hands. "For our secret weekend. You always know how to make me feel special. Love, C." I stared at the words, numb. My mind raced. C. Who was C? Certainly not me. I turned slowly to face Richard. He had not moved. His face was pale, his jaw clenched. "Who is C, Richard?" My voice was steady, but I could feel the quake underneath. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He ran a hand through his hair, then sighed. "It is not what you think." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "Oh really? Because it looks exactly like what I think." "Emily, please. Let us talk." But the silence that followed was louder than any explanation he could offer. I walked past him, my heels clicking sharply against the wooden floor. I stood by the window, looking out at the lights of Bath flickering against the dusky sky. The very air felt different now, heavier, charged with something cruel. "I came here," I said slowly, "to surprise you. I thought we needed time. I thought, maybe we still had a chance." Richard walked towards me, but I stepped back. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. He hesitated. That was enough of an answer. I looked at him, really looked. The man I married was still there, in form, in voice, but something was missing. Or perhaps, something had been added, lies, secrets, shadows. "It was a mistake," he finally said. "It started at work. She was different. But it did not mean anything." My lips curled. "It meant enough to send her roses." He looked away. A heavy pause fell between us. "I will pack my things," I said quietly. But I did not. Not yet. Instead, I went into the bathroom and shut the door. I sat on the cold tiled floor and stared at the cracks between the stones. I could hear him pacing on the other side. Tears welled up, but I did not let them fall. I needed to think. To breathe. To see clearly. After a while, I opened my phone. I scrolled through his messages from the past week. I had never looked before. I trusted him. But tonight, trust was dead. It did not take long to find her. Clara. A contact with no surname, no photo, just a string of sweet nothings and hidden meetups. "I cannot wait to see you in the room. Do you think she suspects anything? You are the only thing I look forward to at these boring conferences." And then, the photo. Not of her face, but of her legs, tangled in hotel sheets. I turned off the phone and stared into the mirror. My reflection looked like me, but colder. Sharper. There was no more space for tears. Only a quiet fire, building in my chest. I stood, adjusted my dress, and walked out. He looked up, surprised to see me calm. "I am staying," I said softly. "Emily." "But not for you." I picked up the silver box and placed it in his hand. "You can give this to her." Then I walked out, letting the door click shut behind me. And that was the moment I decided, I was not just going to leave. I was going to take everything he thought he had, and burn it down. The next morning, I stood in the grand dining hall of the Royal Crescent Hotel. Sunlight poured through the tall sash windows, casting golden patterns across the marble floor. The scent of fresh croissants and coffee filled the air, but I had no appetite. I sat alone at a table for two, staring into a cup of untouched tea. Richard hadn't come back to the room last night. Good. Let him rot in whatever corner he was hiding. I was supposed to return to London today, but I didn't. Instead, I extended my stay. I needed time, space, and perhaps, revenge. The waiter approached with a gentle nod. "Would you care for anything else, madam?" I shook my head politely. "No, thank you." As he walked away, I noticed movement in the corner of the room. My eyes flicked up, and that was when I saw her. She walked in wearing oversized sunglasses, long legs in designer heels, her coat draped over her shoulders like she was strolling into a film premiere. She paused near the entrance, scanning the room. Clara. I recognized her from the photo. The same perfectly styled hair, the same careless poise. She was here. At the same hotel. Bold as brass. The nerve. I didn't look away. And that's when something strange happened. She looked straight at me and smiled. As if we were old friends. I blinked. Was she mocking me? Did she know who I was? She began walking in my direction. I gripped the edge of the table, heart pounding. When she stopped just beside me, she tilted her head and said, "You're Emily, aren't you?" I froze. So she did know me. "And you must be Clara," I said coolly, meeting her gaze. Her smile didn't waver. "I hoped we'd run into each other." "I bet you did." She gave a soft laugh and sat down across from me without being invited. "I imagine you're furious with Richard," she said, unbothered. "I imagine you don't care." "Oh, I care," she said, removing her sunglasses. Her eyes were sharp, almost amused. "But not in the way you think." I narrowed my gaze. "What's that supposed to mean?" Clara leaned in slightly. "You think he betrayed you. But I promise you, he's been playing us both. I didn't know about you until last week." She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone, scrolling through something. Then she slid it across the table. I looked down. A message from Richard, timestamped 3 days ago. "Can't wait to see you again, Clara." She's clueless as ever. My lips parted. The words twisted inside me like a knife. "I confronted him the moment I found out," Clara said. "He told me you were his ex-wife. That you were out of the picture. A messy divorce, or something along those lines." I let out a breath. "And you believed him?" Clara shrugged. "At the time, yes. But it didn't take long to see the cracks." I stared at her, unsure whether to feel hatred or reluctant sympathy. "I didn't come here for him," she continued. "I came to make sure you knew." I folded my arms. "Why bother?" She smiled faintly. "Because if we're both smart women, and I believe we are, then perhaps we can ruin him better together than apart." Her words hung in the air like perfume, intoxicating and dangerous. I stared at her, weighing every syllable. The idea was mad. Revenge with the mistress. Unthinkable. But also, poetic. "What exactly did you have in mind?" I asked, voice low. Clara's eyes sparkled with something wicked. And in that moment, a strange alliance was born. One that Richard would never see coming. By the evening, the plan had taken root. Clara and I agreed to keep up appearances, separately, of course. Richard hadn't returned any of my texts, which was perfect. Let him stew in his own cowardice. But that night, he came crawling back. I was on the terrace of the hotel bar, watching the sun dip below the hills of Bath, when I heard that voice. "Emily, love, there you are." I turned slowly, placing my wine glass down. There he stood, all charm and guilt, like nothing had happened. Hair perfectly tousled, his jumper just slightly rumpled for effect. The actor returned to the stage. "Where have you been?" I asked, feigning hurt. "Oh darling, I needed time to clear my head. I went for a drive, ended up staying at a mate's place just outside Bristol." "A mate?" "Right." I didn't blink. "You could have at least called." He stepped forward, cupping my hand. "I know. And I'm sorry. I've just been under so much pressure lately. Work's a mess. The villa, the firm, everything's piling up." I nodded slowly, giving him just enough rope. He smiled. "Let me make it up to you. Dinner, tonight. The restaurant downstairs. Just the two of us." "Perfect." "All right," I said softly. "Let's try again." By 7, I was in a black velvet dress, my hair swept back, lips red as sin. I looked calm. Serene. A woman who had forgiven. But inside, I was sharp as a blade. Richard arrived first, already at our table, a bottle of wine waiting. He stood as I approached, kissing my cheek like nothing had cracked between us. We talked about his work, my supposed disinterest in finances, the villa renovations. He went on, and I let him. Then, just as the main course was served, Clara arrived. She walked into the restaurant as if she owned the place. Heads turned. She wore a silk burgundy dress that shimmered in the candlelight. Richard choked on his wine. "Excuse me," he said, grabbing his napkin and rising abruptly. I watched him hurry over to Clara, whispering furiously. She looked innocent. Calm. I couldn't hear their words, but I saw the panic in his eyes. Clara said something, then her gaze met mine. And she smiled. She pointed back toward our table. Richard's head whipped round. He froze when he saw me watching. I raised my glass ever so slightly, and smiled too. The room was heavy with tension now. Richard made a half-hearted attempt to guide Clara out, but she shook her head and walked away, cool as ice. He returned, trying to compose himself. "Who was that?" I asked, stirring my risotto. He hesitated. "No one. Just a client. From London. A client in a backless dress and heels." His jaw clenched. "She's eccentric." "Millimeter," I said. "So are you, apparently." His fork paused halfway to his mouth. I leaned in. "Tell me, Richard. How long has this been going on?" He stared at me, eyes flickering. "I don't know what you mean." "Of course you do." I watched the facade crumble, just a little. The corner of his mouth twitched. But I wasn't finished. I reached into my handbag, pulled out the copy of the villa's deed, the one I'd had redrawn just this morning. And I placed it on the table. His face paled. "What is this?" "Oh," I said lightly. "Just a little change of ownership. Effective immediately. You see, I spoke to the solicitors. Since I paid for it entirely in my name, well, you're no longer on the deed." His mouth opened, no words came out. "You gave her my villa for her birthday," I said, voice like velvet. "Now it's neither hers, nor yours." I stood, placing my napkin gently on the table. "Enjoy your dinner, darling." And I walked away, heels clicking like a drumbeat of power. Behind me, silence. Ahead of me, freedom. But I wasn't done. Not yet. The next morning, Richard was gone. No note. No message. Not even a call. I wasn't surprised. I sipped my tea slowly in the grand lounge of the hotel, the crisp bath air drifting through the open windows. The scene outside looked picture-perfect, golden sunlight casting long shadows on Georgian stone. It was almost peaceful. But inside me, there was a storm brewing. Clara and I met at a quiet tea room on Queen Street, tucked away from the tourist trail. She wore sunglasses and a trench coat, as if she were auditioning for a spy film. I couldn't help but chuckle when I saw her. "So," she said, sliding into the seat opposite me, "how did last night go?" "Oh, you know," I said, stirring my Earl Grey. I told him he was no longer on the deed. Left him to digest his risotto and his own betrayal. Clara let out a low whistle. "Remind me never to cross you." "Noted," I said with a smirk. But there was still more to do. Richard had spent the last year crafting the illusion of the perfect husband. Doting. Supportive. Sophisticated. He charmed everyone, from business partners to waiters, from my friends to strangers at the opera. But now, I had to show the world who he really was. The first step. Unravel the finances. Over the next few days, Clara and I combed through every account I'd once ignored. His name appeared in all the wrong places. Transfer after transfer to accounts I'd never heard of, vague consulting fees, and gifts, expensive ones, that I never received. He'd used my earnings to build a life with her. I wasn't just furious. I was focused. Clara's friend worked in finance. A forensic accountant. Within hours, she had a full report printed and bound. Then came the final stage, the gala. It was the annual Whitmore Foundation Gala, an elite event in London, always held at the Kensington Town Hall. Black tie, orchestra, flashing cameras. Richard had been preparing for it for months, proudly announcing that he was set to speak this year. And I decided that would be the perfect night. I walked in wearing the same gown I wore at our wedding reception, ivory silk, with embroidered silver leaves across the bodice. A quiet, devastating statement. The crowd turned as I entered. Murmurs followed. Richard, already on stage, faltered mid-sentence when he saw me. I gave a small nod, taking my seat in the front row. Clara was there too, filming discreetly with a small camera pinned to her clutch. Richard tried to continue, but his voice trembled. He ended his speech quickly, and as the applause faded, I rose. "Excuse me," I said, stepping up to the stage. A hush fell over the room. "My name is Emily Whitmore," I said into the microphone. "Some of you may know me as the wife of Richard Whitmore." Gasps. Whispers. "But what you don't know," I continued, "is that while I supported his dreams, he used our resources to fund a second life. One that included a mistress, luxury gifts, and a deceit so thorough it would make a playwright weep." I held up the report. "This," I said, "is every transaction. Every lie. Every stolen pound." Richard stood frozen, pale and rigid. "I'll be sending copies to your investors. To the Foundation's board. And, of course, to the press." I smiled faintly. "And just for the record, Richard. The suit you're wearing tonight. I bought that too." The silence was deafening. Then, slowly, like raindrops on a tin roof, applause began. From the back. Then the middle. Then all around me. Clara stood first, clapping hard. I left the stage with my head high, heart pounding. Justice had begun. But revenge? That was still simmering. 2 days after the gala, I received a message. It was from Victoria. Just her name lighting up my screen was enough to make my stomach turn. But I didn't delete it. I opened it. "We need to talk. In private. It's important." I stared at the message for a long time. Every part of me wanted to ignore her, to let her drown in the mess she helped create. But something told me this was more than guilt. I agreed to meet her at a quiet cafe by the River Avon, a place so empty and grey that even the birds seemed uninterested. She looked different this time. No designer clothes, no glossy hair or flawless makeup. Just a beige jumper and a nervous look in her eyes. "I suppose I should thank you," she began, voice low. "You destroyed Richard in a way I never could." I didn't speak. Just raised an eyebrow. She sighed, fingers wrapping tightly around her coffee cup. "He told me you were cold. That your marriage was dead. That you didn't care." He painted himself as the victim, and I was stupid enough to believe him. "That makes two of us," I said sharply. She winced. "I didn't know everything. I swear I didn't. But, that night at the hotel, when you showed up, I realized I was just a piece in a bigger game. And now you want to clear your conscience?" I asked. Victoria looked away. "No. I want to help you end it properly." That got my attention. She reached into her bag and pulled out a black notebook, worn and bulging with loose pages. "He kept notes. Of everything," she whispered. "Every lie. Every transaction. Every backup plan in case things went wrong." I took it slowly, flipping through the pages. Dates. Names. codes, even passwords. Why give this to me? I asked. Because I loved him, she said simply. And now I hate him even more. I stood, clutching the notebook. If any of this is fake. It's not, she cut in. Anne, there's one more thing. She hesitated. I'm pregnant. The words knocked the air out of my lungs. I stared at her, trying to read her expression. I'm not asking for anything, she said quickly. I don't want him in my life. I just thought you should know. Because he will try to come back. And when he does, he'll use anything, anyone, to win. I walked away without another word, the notebook pressed tight against my chest. Back at Clara's flat, I laid everything out on the table, Richard's betrayal in full color. The fake invoices. The ghost accounts. The secret rendezvous in Paris. And now, a baby on the way. Clara stared at the mess, wide-eyed. What do we do now? We finish this, I said coldly. We bring him down so thoroughly, he'll never dare to resurface. It was time to move from exposure to execution. The world saw the cracks in his mask. Now, they'd see it crumble. With the notebook in hand, I worked through every detail, each transaction, each lie, every thread Richard had spun. Clara and I transformed her living room into a war room. Sticky notes on the walls. Printouts covering the floor. Names circled in red. Arrows connecting timelines. We weren't just hunting him. We were building a case that would bury him. I began leaking small pieces to the right people. First, to a trusted journalist at the Telegraph, someone who specialized in exposing corporate fraud. Then to the tax office. And finally, to the clients he'd so proudly paraded at his gala. Clients who had invested millions based on falsified projections and charm. One by one, they started calling. The bank froze his accounts. His business partner resigned live on air, claiming he had been manipulated and blindsided. Within a week, Richard's empire began to rot from within. He tried to fight back, of course. Issued statements. Claimed sabotage. Even tried to paint himself as the victim of a bitter, vengeful ex-wife. But the evidence spoke louder than his desperate cries. Then came the moment I had waited for. He called me. The number was still the same. I let it ring twice before answering. Marissa, he breathed, like saying my name was painful. We need to talk. I didn't reply. I know what you're doing, he continued, voice low. You've made your point. Just stop this. Please. You don't understand what's at stake. You mean your freedom? I said coldly. There are others involved. People who won't go down quietly. Not my problem, I replied. You built this house of lies. I'm just opening the windows. Marissa, I hung up. It was Clara who found the final nail. She spotted a name that appeared 3 times in the notebook, Gordon Pell. Not a client, not a colleague. A retired solicitor in Bristol. We paid him a visit. He was kind. Quiet. Surprised to see us. And then he told us everything. He had helped Richard create the offshore accounts. Advised him on how to reroute money, mask bribes, bury evidence. But most importantly, he had recorded every session. For insurance. And he was willing to give it all to us. In exchange for what? I asked. Immunity, he replied. I've got grandchildren, Mrs. Whitmore. I won't go down for his crimes. The recordings were damning. Crystal clear audio of Richard boasting, plotting, laughing at the people he manipulated. It was enough to destroy whatever scraps of reputation he had left. I turned them over to the authorities the next day. By the following Monday, Richard Whitmore was arrested in front of cameras, dragged from his Mayfair office in handcuffs. I watched it live, sipping my tea as his world collapsed in high definition. And as the reporters screamed his name, as the headlines exploded across the screens, I finally smiled. But I knew it wasn't over. There was one more thing I had to do. The dust had barely settled after Richard's arrest when I realized there was still one final piece to reclaim. The villa. My sanctuary. The place I had poured so much love and care into, only for it to be tarnished by his betrayal. The place that had once been our dream, and now stood as a symbol of everything he had stolen. I didn't want revenge anymore. I didn't want his money. I didn't want his power. What I wanted was closure. To take back what was mine. The villa in the Cotswolds was still registered in both of our names, despite everything. I had a lawyer file the necessary paperwork, ensuring I would retain full ownership. But I needed to do something more. I needed to make sure Richard knew it wasn't just the villa I was taking back, it was everything he had tried to steal from me, my dignity, my peace, my sense of self. And I would do it on my terms. That weekend, I drove to the villa alone. The place was quiet, serene. The green hills stretched out before me, the old stone walls bathed in golden sunlight. It was the perfect escape. The kind of retreat Richard had promised we would enjoy forever. But forever, in his eyes, had always meant something different than in mine. I walked through the front door, the wooden floors creaking beneath my feet, the smell of lavender still lingering in the air. The house hadn't changed. It still held all the memories, both good and bad. I stood in the center of the living room for a moment, letting the silence embrace me. It felt right. It felt like home again. And then, just as I was about to walk upstairs, I heard the sound of an engine pulling up outside. I knew who it was before I even looked out the window. Richard. He must have gotten wind of my plans. Must have realized that I was taking ownership of everything, and that the house was no longer his. I watched from the window as he stepped out of the car, looking disheveled and desperate. He tried to look calm, composed, but I could see the fear in his eyes. I didn't move. I didn't go to the door to greet him. He knocked. And then he rang the bell. I let him stand there, in the cold, for a long moment. Finally, I opened the door. "Marissa," he said, his voice shaky. I don't know what happened. I thought. "You thought you could take everything from me," I interrupted, my voice sharp. "You thought I would be a victim forever, but you were wrong." He swallowed hard, his face a mixture of anger and confusion. "I didn't do anything wrong," he said, his voice rising. "I didn't." "You didn't think I'd find out?" I asked, stepping closer. "You didn't think I would fight back?" His eyes flickered to the villa, as if seeing it for the first time in a way that wasn't about ownership. "You can't just take this from me. This is mine too." I stared at him, coldly. "No, Richard. This is mine now. And so is everything you ever thought you could steal from me." There was no fury in my voice. No anger. Just a cold, steady determination. He didn't say anything. The words had failed him. For once, he was speechless. I closed the door in his face. It was over. The next day, I filed the papers to fully transfer the villa into my name. It was final. Richard had no claim left. As I sat in the garden, sipping tea with Clara later that week, the weight of it all finally began to lift. The betrayal, the lies, the years of manipulation, they were behind me. And in their place, I found peace. Richard had tried to take everything from me, but in the end, he had failed. Because what he could never understand was that I wasn't just taking back what was mine. I was reclaiming myself. And for the first time in a long while, I could breathe again.